Good evening. Welcome to our continuing series of classes on the daily liturgy, the daily prayers. We began discussing the Moda Ani, a prayer in which we express our gratitude to God for giving us back our soul. And obviously, you only say that when you're awake. When you sleep, we do not say that blessing. Although some people do talk in their sleep, this is not the way it was designed. We wake up in the morning and we recite that blessing the first thing we do. The first feeling of consciousness has to be one in which we are grateful. We are grateful to God. We spoke about the topic of gratitude. We're alive. We then transition to another blessing in which we thank God for giving us the mitzvah, the commandment to wash our hands. Because washing of our hands is a way of removing the vestigial impurities that remain on our hands when we wake up. And we explained how when a person is asleep, since there's a cessation or a termination or a curtailment of life, that is a place where God's presence is not as strongly pronounced. That's what we mean by impurity. It's a lull in the spiritual awareness and consciousness. When that is the case, then that's what we mean by impurity. When you wake up and your soul returns to you, the impurity goes away, but there's a vestige of it left in our fingertips, which we discussed in last week's class, that we remove by pouring water over our fingertips. And that's what we recite this blessing, thanking God for giving us the ability to purify ourselves and allow our soul's presence to be forcefully expressed. So we finished those two prayers or blessings in which we're grateful for our soul and for the purification of our soul, that our soul should not be hampered when it begins to take effect and inform and influence our lives and change the way the rest of the day will follow. And now we go to the third prayer, third blessing. I just want to note before we begin that there are different versions of the blessings in terms of the order of the blessings in different communities. I'm following the standard Chabad version of the prayers that is based on the teachings of the Arizal, the great Kabbalist who lived 442 years ago. He passed away 442 years ago. And he other slight variations, some of which I will point out as we go along. Now we get to the blessing that is called Asher Yatzar. That's the way it's referred to in Hebrew because of the opening words. The opening words, the standard opening words to every blessing is, "Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe." And this is true with this blessing as well. And then we go on in about another 5 lines of thanking God for which not only acknowledges God's role in being alive and having good health, but focuses on certain bodily functions. And of course, when we wake up in the morning and we take care of our hygiene and our bodily functions, we very rarely take note of the miracle that is good health in general, and specifically that we're able to relieve ourselves of the waste products. So while the blessing before this was about removing spiritual impurities, this blessing is about removing physical impurities. That's one way of showing the parallel between these two blessings. And they're said in consecutive order. First, we wash hands again and recite this specific blessing, thanking God for our bodily functions that are functioning properly and normally. This is, as I said before, I believe unparalleled. When people, especially physicians, read about this and learn about this, they marvel at the sensitivity that Judaism has to this particular part of our anatomy and our health. Especially if you're a GI doctor, they are very, very impressed and amazed that we have this blessing. Now, just to add a little bit of spice to this, This blessing is said to have 45 words. I didn't count before the class, but I trust the authorities that it's 45 words. Although there are different versions of it. In some versions it has more than 45, but this version I believe is 45. 45 is numerically significant. In Hebrew, numbers are also words. Words are numbers. And the number 45 is the gematria, meaning has the numerical equivalent of the word Adam, person, human being. And that suggests that it takes a human being to appreciate what is going on with our body. All animals are just like human beings in this regard. They all have to ingest food and they also have to expel the food, the waste product. But only the human being, and it has to be a sensitive human being, has the intelligence to figure out that this is a miracle for which we have to be grateful every day. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go on. So we thank God for this bodily function, and we'll go through the words as we go on. And now we're thanking God for the body. And here's where we have to have a little bit of a discussion about the role of the body in Judaism, and more specifically, the way Hasidic philosophy, mystical tradition in particular, Hasidic philosophy in particular, based on mystical tradition, I should say, views the role of the body. First of all, in many religions, and there are strains of that in Judaism as well, the body is something that is scorned. In the ideal state of consciousness, in the ideal spiritual world, a body is an impediment. A body has to be tolerated. And whenever possible, if you are on a spiritual level, you try to reject the needs of the body. You engage in what is called ascetic behavior. If you are a priest in any religion, if you are a spiritual person, don't respect your body, that you scorn your body, you reject your body and its needs. The physical world is seen as an impediment to spirituality, which of course begs the question, then why in the world did God create this physical world to be scorned? None of Judaism is possible without the body. Yes, a soul could meditate. Spiritual entities like angels do meditate, they praise God. But most of Judaism is not prayer. Most of Judaism is action. Action that requires physical human beings, physical bodies, physical actions. You can't give charity with a prayer. You cannot feed a hungry person with a prayer. You can add the prayer, but it's not going to help. You could be guilty of murder if you see a starving person and he asks for food and you say, I'll pray for you. And meanwhile, he drops dead. You are accomplice to his death. That is a crime. So Judaism requires, not just in the mitzvahs, the commandments that are social between man, but also in the more religious, so-called religious area, man to God commandments. They are also physical commandments. We put on a prayer shawl, we put on it. Day in and day out, you fulfilled zero. You accomplished nothing. It's an exercise in futility. However, if you ate the matzah without any concentration, without any spiritual experience, you connected with God. Now, added to that, you want to instill it with soul and meaning and depth, but that's the icing on the cake. So Judaism is about the physical world and transforming the physical world. And therefore, the body plays a very important role, not just an important role, the central role in accomplishing that. So Judaism does not look at the body as a soul's stepchild, unwanted, tolerated, a burden, something we have to accept but we can't really appreciate. No, the body is really a very important part of Judaism. Everyone is familiar with the expression, the temple of the soul. So even when the soul is no longer there, we still treat the body with respect and dignity. Hasidic philosophy takes it a step further and says not only is the body important, it's more important than the soul in some respects. But it doesn't mean that the body should control the soul. It means that the soul is there, and yet the teacher has to guide the student. The student can't dictate to the teacher what he should be taught. So it's the teacher, the soul, that informs the student, the body, but the purpose of informing, it's not by accident that it's one of the first things that we say in the morning, and it's a blessing that we say more than any other blessing very often, because it's said any time a person uses the facilities, after which they wash their hands and they say this blessing. Okay, man in wisdom. The word man does not mean male, masculine. I don't know why they keep on translating it man, although I'm not so excited about trying to make everything gender neutral. But in this case, here it means person. God formed the person with wisdom. Uh, but the word man here means man generically, openings and hollows. But it means open spaces within us. It is revealed and known before your throne of glory. It's another way of saying you know. I'll explain why it uses that uh, circumlocution. I believe that's the right word for saying things beating around the bush. That if but one of them, one of these orifices, one of these openings were to be blocked, or one of them were to be ruptured or opened, it would be impossible to survive for even a short while. We cannot survive if our GI system doesn't function. Blessed are you, God, who heals all flesh and performs wonders. So this, in general words, is a expression of gratitude for our plumbing. That's how we put it very simply. So let's go through this line by line. We started off by saying you formed us with wisdom. Very often the term that is used to everything uniformly. God created the world. Okay, that means he created the substance of the universe. When you say he formed something, it means he gave it character. He gave it flavor. He gave it color. He gave it nuance. He gave it its specific identity and personality. So when we talk about God creating a human being, if we just said created, yes, it means we're created. We exist. So does the table. So does the animal. That doesn't express our individuality and our uniqueness. What we're saying over here is that God formed a human being and endowed him with wisdom, which doesn't exist with any other creature on earth. Yes, animals have wisdom, some type of intelligence. Maybe even plants have some type of intelligence. It's not important to negate the idea of intelligence. What is important over here is to negate the idea of true chachma, of true wisdom. A human being is endowed with godly wisdom, and therefore we have the ability to appreciate every aspect of our life. We have special character that makes us unique and makes us different from every other creation. Now, we said he formed us with wisdom. There are two explanations what he means by that. One explanation is that God used God's wisdom, his wisdom, to form us. That the human being, and this makes the human being different from other creations, that other creations were not endowed, God did not use his unique wisdom. God used a lower faculty to create all other creations. But the human being is different. Because even though we're thanking God for bodily functions, we're thanking God for our GI system, which is not really very different from other creatures. Every creature has that gastrointestinal system. But the way God created ours was with chachma, with wisdom. The human being is not just different in terms of the mind of the human being, the entire being is a different being. We are not just animals with additional wisdom. We are a unique. That's one explanation, that God created us with his wisdom. And the second explanation is that God created us that we should be endowed with wisdom. That we have this power of wisdom that no other creature has. And for that we are eternally grateful, that we are that type of creation. A human being has to be thankful to God for everything. And it's easy just to say, God, thank you for everything. That's nice. But it's not true gratitude if you don't show gratitude for each individual blessing you have. Because it's somewhat of a cop out to just write thank you for everything. What we're saying is that God planted his own wisdom in us, that our soul's wisdom is actually a product of God's wisdom. We have divine wisdom in us. This counters what people will often say, that a human being is just human or we're like an animal. No, we have a godly identity. Different levels of that, different aspects of that, that God created us with his will. There's really no difference between a human being and a table. If there's a table, it means God wanted it. Because if he didn't will it, it wouldn't exist. So the table is God's will, the animal for individuality and differences. And on that hierarchy, in the hierarchy of differences, we are on the top. We are created with his wisdom. We express divine wisdom. Animals have intelligence, but they don't to animals, because that's what makes us human, that we can go high or low. We can never be in the middle. Animals are in the middle. They're always on one level. They don't go up, they don't go down. They're standing in one level. Whatever level that they were created, yes, you could train an animal, but the animal still remains confined to that level. Humans can go to the sky and they can go down to the abyss. We say openings and hollows, or as they have it in this translation, openings and cavities. What's the difference? So the commentaries say that one refers to external openings, our eyes, our mouth, our ears, and the other one refers to internal openings, the lungs, the heart. We would be in big trouble. In general, the difference between external and internal, it has ramifications in the area of Judaism's approach to medicine, the ages. Judaism certainly appreciated the art and science of medicine. But there is also a tradition within Judaism that was very skeptical about medical treatment. And there are two trends that are not necessarily contradictory, but it's a subject for another discussion. But there's an interesting comment written by the Even Ezra and somewhat modified by Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Even Ezra was the 11th, 12th century, and Yonasan Eibeshitz was 18th century. And they said that while the Torah does grant the physician the right to heal, we don't just say, let God take care of the person, as some religions would want us to do, but allows for the doctor to intervene. However, they make a distinction between external organs and internal organs. That external organs, like an injury, a doctor has a right to heal, but what's internal, that's beyond the physician. Now, many writers explain that that was true hundreds of years ago when they knew very little about what was inside. So really, if a doctor was tampering with your pancreas, you were probably better off leaving the doctor's treatment out of the picture. Surgery in those days could have been were deadly. I mean, the things that are beyond us that we cannot see, and those are the ones that force even the best physician to come to the recognition. You know what? We must rely on God because I can't reach it. There's something, it's beyond my abilities. And no matter how much medical science progresses, there will always be areas that are esoteric, that are beyond the medical community to reach. So what we're saying over here is that there are external and internal, and both of these we have to thank God for their health, for their good health. Because even the external that physicians could treat, they still need God's assistance. The internal, they can't even treat. And if they do, very often they could be groping in the dark. Then we say it's revealed and known before your throne. But The reason why it uses the term, it is revealed and known, rather than you know, is because there's a theological problem with the whole idea of God knowing things. Maimonides raises, if we say God knows something, God knows the universe, He knows everything going on, He knows what is happening. If I raise my hand, He knows that I raised my hand. That means before I raised my hand, He didn't have that knowledge. So He is changing. The knowledge that He did not have is now being acquired by Him. That goes against the basic premise and belief that I, God, have never changed. God does not change. We say that in our prayers. You were the one before the world was created, and you are the same one after it was created. Creation doesn't change anything, because if it would change, that would take away from God's unity. That means there's something outside of God that God has to introduce into His system. And that would go against the whole concept of God's unity and God's not changing, not being affected, because anything that changes means that it is finite. It's not infinite. Infinity doesn't change. Himself and incorporate it into Himself. That would be that God is constantly changing every time there's a new experience in this universe. So God's knowledge is not is active knowledge, it's a passive knowledge. It is automatically known to Him. And that's what we're saying over here, that it is known to you that if anything changed in our biological system, we would be goners. He doesn't have to know it because he went to medical school, because he read a book about it, because he is smart. It's part of his existence. Nothing exists outside of him. Therefore, he knows himself. He knows everything. And he was there before it was created, so he's not knowing anything outside of himself. The throne of your glory is the world, the way God relates to this world. A throne is the king's seat. When he sits on that throne, what is he essentially saying? I am now your king. I am connected to you. I'm no longer separated from you. I am committed to you. God is beyond the throne of glory. When we say throne of glory, we're talking about God who is involved in the world, who is immanent, who's connected to the world. When we say before the throne of your glory, that means the aspect of God that is beyond his relationship with the world. And that's the aspect of God that doesn't need to know. It is known, automatically known before him. When you're talking about God who is consciously, actively engaged within the world, there you could say God knows, he's involved, he's part of the process. When you're talking about before the throne of glory, you're talking about God who is beyond actively knowing. There it's passive knowledge. There's an expression used that there is no forgetfulness before your throne of glory, which means that when you're dealing with the level of knowledge called Bina, Bina is understanding. That's when you tackle a subject, you comprehend it, you analyze it, you discuss it, you elaborate on it. There could be forgetfulness. There it's possible for you to forget. But when you're in the level of Chachma is considered to be transcendent knowledge, there is no forgetfulness. You become more human in that sense, if we use that expression. But before the throne of glory, you're connected to the divine, and there's no forgetfulness. There's no need for conscious, active knowledge. It's known. It's part of your genetic material. Just like you can't forget something that's part of you. It's in your genes. I mean, you study something and it becomes etched into your memory. You don't forget it because it's something that you really care about. It's something that you put your whole life into learning and absorbing, and you don't forget those things. You only forget things that you have from the very beginning a very, very casual interest in. There's a certain disconnect between you and the subject. Students go take courses at university, and there's certain courses they only need the grade. They don't care for the subject, They'll cram before the test, guaranteed a week later, some will say an hour later, they will forget everything. It's almost guaranteed. But students that learn a subject because that's their major, that's their interest, their passion in life, will remember things. Same thing over here. When you're talking about the attribute of bina, of understanding, of comprehension, it's more of an intellectual exercise. It's dispassionate. It's just very cold, intellectual. You're subject to forgetfulness, and it's an active. You have to actively engage in it because it's not enough. We're not just praising God. That God. Why are we even emphasizing that God knows all this? Couldn't we just say that you, you created these cavities and these orifices, and if any of them would be plugged or opened, we couldn't survive? Why does he have to add it? You know, God, you know, it's your knowledge, because God's knowledge is imprinted in us. We have that knowledge in us. It's part of our consciousness as well. Then we say it would be impossible to survive. In other versions, it says it would be impossible to stand before you, survive and stand before you. In other words, we wouldn't be able to worship God if we were not healthy. Uh, Without health, health affects our spiritual life as well. The Maggid of Mizrich, the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, was the leader of the Hasidic movement, once said that if there's a small hole in the body, it creates a large hole in the soul. That health is extremely important, not for just physical reasons, but for spiritual reasons. A person who has a terrible headache can't study Torah. A person who is confined to bed can't go out and help other people. A person who is ill can't fulfill the mitzvahs properly, can't out, or is never inserted. That we couldn't stand before you. And the reason some people suggest is this blessing is not focusing on our spiritual life. By design, it ignores the spiritual, not because the spiritual is not important, but it doesn't want you to think that the physical is only important, that it has no intrinsic value. We're saying no, the body has intrinsic value, in addition to its being the vehicle through which we're able to stand before God. So there's no need to emphasize the standing before God, since obviously it's self-understood that if we're in a coma, we can't be very much we can't stand before God. But there's no need to emphasize it because we want to emphasize the role of the body. Then we say, "Blessed are you, God, who heals all flesh and performs wonders." Uh, Heals all flesh. God heals all flesh. What about the doctors and the nurses and the medical community? Do they not do any healing? So, first of all, absolutely. As I mentioned before, the Torah gives the physician and all the medical community the license, the right, the ability, the blessing, and the encouragement to heal. But they have to recognize that they're not healing with their own powers, that God is causing them to heal. See, there were always two diametrically opposite philosophies about medicine. One extreme, that was God's will. Then you have the opposite extreme, as a backlash perhaps. Leave God out of it. The body is a machine. The doctor is a technician. Something is not hones its art and the techniques, we will become capable of treating every illness. And of course, that extreme is just as bad as the other extreme. In some ways worse, because the person who prays about God, but thinking about God is, number one, true and honest. That's really what's going on. And number two, we don't know how to determine this, but if you do invoke God, your odds are better. It's a miracle. But when a person wakes up in the morning, goes through the whole day, and they don't have any gastrointestinal problems, they don't sit down to say, wow, that was a miracle. So if you throw in illness would detract from the real expression of gratitude. We're thanking God for the natural devices that he gives us, that they didn't malfunction. Then we say that he acts wondrously. What is the wonder over here? The wonder is that our dominant physician that who, who worked in a hospital said there are so many things that could go wrong with the body. It's such a miracle that everything goes right. It's not an aberration when something goes wrong. The aberration is when everything goes right or something goes right. That is the miracle. That's the wonder. That's the simple way of explaining it. In Hasidic thought, the focus here is not on the fact that our health is so precarious and yet we're alive and healthy, because that's something that we don't look at as a wonder. Why is it not a wonder? Because it's something that happens every day. Repeated miracles are no longer considered miracles. Water. Okay. If I want to take a cup and fill it with potatoes, say that's a little strange. You usually put potatoes in a bag. A cup you use for water, for coffee. But it's not outrageous. You could put a potato in a cup. But if I say, okay, take the cup, you won't think that I lost my mind. If I said, could you please put a potato in the cup, fill my cup with potatoes, you won't think I lost my mind. But if I tell you, could you please take the love that you have for someone and put it in that bottle and keep it in the refrigerator? Say, what's this person talking about? Or take logic and fill up. I'm going to New York now. I need a lot of logic. I'm getting into an argument. Can you fill my trunk with logic? You say the man lost his mind. Why? Because logic doesn't fit into a trunk of a car. It doesn't fit. If I tell you, take a gallon of water and pour it in a quart, you'd say, you don't know your measurements very well. A gallon is more than a quart. But it's not crazy. It's just ignorant. But if I tell you, fill the quart with knowledge, that's crazy. It's crazy that a soul which is totally spiritual, it's more abstract than just knowledge or love or feelings. It's the ultimate abstraction, God, because to him spiritual and physical are no different. That's one wonder. The second wonder is that the soul and the body have such perfect correspondence. There's a part of the soul that fits into the brain, part of the soul that fits into the heart. And if one part of the soul fits into the wrong organ, we would be dead. The soul just so neatly, not only is it connected, but it neatly fits into it as if it was a glove, a hand in a glove. There's just so total symmetry between the soul and the body that it doesn't make any sense logically. Theologically, it's the greatest mystery. That's why we say God performs wonders in bringing the soul and body together. So in conclusion, this blessing is one of the most beautiful, most powerful blessings because it really destroys the idea of taking things for granted. Because I think most people don't even think about thanking God unless they were trained to say this blessing when after using the facilities. That's not what's on their thought. You go into the airport, people are rushing into the facilities, they go out. What is the first thing they have on their mind? Not saying, oh, thank you, God. But for a Jew who says this, that's the first thought that he has. What? Yeah. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you.